This is AP US History. Today's topic is the beginnings of the Civil War. However, before we get to the Civil War, I need you to get out your expansion maps. You're actually going to need 4 colored pencils or 4 crayons or something for this. So if you take your expansion map and you flip it to the back, there will be a map that has all of the states. And what you need to do now is either at home while you have a chance now, I guess if we have time we can try to get this in school, but for now let's try to get this done at home. You're going to color in the different parts of the United States in terms of their status during the Civil War. Now if you look at the map, you'll see 3 different colors, but again you're going to need 4 because there are 4 different categories that are listed on the left. The first one, and probably the easiest one, is the green colored ones. Those are all of the territories. So you can just color all of those green, or whatever color you want to. The next one is going to be the states that are going to be the Confederate States of America. And looking at this map, that is going to be all of the states that are bluish gray under the red line, south of the red line. So that's going to include Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. So the Confederate States of America are all of the bluish gray states that are south of the red line. Everything north of the red line that is either bluish gray or yellow is going to be the Union. Those are states that remain in the United States. Now all of the yellow brownish colored states are going to be Union states that are free. There is no slavery in those states. The one thing that's a little tricky here is going to be those states that are in bluish gray, but they are north of that red line. And that's going to be Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. Those are states that do have slavery, but they stay in the Union. They do not secede. So again, those have slavery, but they don't secede. So what you should be doing in your map is coloring in the distinct areas. We've got the territories, number 1. We've got the Confederate States of America, which are all of the bluish gray states south of the red line. You've got the Union Free States, which are the yellow brownish colored states, and then you've also got the Union Slave States, which are the bluish gray that are above the red line. So those are the different classifications of land within the United States during the Civil War. So make sure you have those down. All right, again, the topic today is the beginnings of the Civil War, and the first thing is the election of 1860. All right, so in the election of 1860, we've got a couple things going on. First of all, the Democratic Party is being split in 2. And a lot of that is because of the results of the Lecompton Constitution, where you've got Southern Democrats who are arguing for a pro-slavery government in Kansas, but you've got Northern Democrats led by Stephen Douglas who are trying to stick with popular sovereignty. The end result of this is that we have a Southern Democratic Party, and they're going to nominate their own candidate, John Breckinridge, and we have a Northern Democratic Party, which is going to nominate Stephen Douglas. The Republicans, this is their second presidential election. They had a candidate in 1856. In 1860, this is their second election, and they're going to nominate Abraham Lincoln. We also have another party, Constitutional Union, which is going to be very popular in the middle or the border states as somewhat of a moderate party. Now, because we have a split election, we've got 4 candidates and we've got the Democratic Party split in half, that's going to end up giving this election to Abraham Lincoln. Now, it's not totally clear that even if he had not had multiple opponents, that he wouldn't have won. He might have still won. However, it's clear that that certainly throws off the Democratic Party, and as a result of it being fragmented, Lincoln gets a majority of electoral votes, even though he only wins 39% of popular votes. As you can see in the map that's here, there's definitely regional differences that emerge. You've got obviously the Southern Democrat doing very popular in the South. Many Northern Democrats do indeed vote for Stephen Douglas. However, he is outpolled in all of the northern states by Abraham Lincoln. Stephen Douglas does maintain some measure of support in terms of electoral votes in Missouri, New Jersey, even though he gets a large number of popular votes. And then the Constitutional Union Party is, again, fairly popular in the border states. Now, the major result of this is obviously the fact that Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency. That is huge in terms of how it's interpreted in the South, because Southerners already do not like the Republican Party. They view it as being a party that is committed to the abolishment of slavery, but also with that is the abolishment of the Southern way of life. They incorrectly tied Republicans to things like Harper's Ferry and the Potawatomi Massacre, and thus Southerners now have to come to grips with the fact that a Republican whom they view as being out to get them is now in charge of the country, is now the president of the United States. Because remember, Lincoln is the first Republican president. And this is something that many Southerners simply cannot accept. And that is what's going to drive South Carolina to be the first state to call a special convention to discuss secession. And that takes place just after the election of 1860. So they are meeting in December of 1860. It does not take very long before South Carolina has decided that they are going to secede from the Union. They have a vote. It's unanimous. And so South Carolina on December 20th, 1860 does indeed vote to secede from the United States. In the 3 months between this point and when Lincoln takes office in March, 6 other southern states have seceded from the Union, and these are going to be the 6 other Deep South states. So we've got Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. So the 7 southernmost states secede from the Union. And at this point, there are 7. What they do next is these states and the state governments begin seizing federal property within their borders. So if there was a fort or a federal building, post offices, arsenals that have weapons, anything that the federal government owned, these states begin to seize. And they meet in Montgomery, Alabama, where representatives from each state form a national level government. And this is going to create the Confederate States of America. It is a country that is fairly based upon the United States of America in terms of its organization, setup, government style. They would have a president and vice president, for example. The first president, well, the first and only president of the Confederate States of America would be Jefferson Davis. The difference between the Confederate States of America and the United States of America is that the Confederacy was indeed a confederacy. It was a confederation very similar to what we had under the Articles of Confederation. So basically, it left more power with the individual states than it did with the central government. and that makes sense coming from the South. These are the states that are advocating for states' rights, so that makes sense. They decide that they are going to form this government and have a national capital in Montgomery, Alabama. However, they are shortly going to move that to Richmond, Virginia. Virginia has not joined the Confederacy yet, but they will soon. So the capital of the Confederacy is going to be Richmond, Virginia for almost the entire Civil War, but it starts in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, going back to the southern states seizing federal property, this includes numerous forts throughout the South, many of whom were garrisoned by Southern troops anyway, or soldiers who were from the South, so this was not very difficult. There were two places that the South initially did not have the ability to seize, and one of those, the most important by far, was Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is on an island in Charleston Harbor. It protects the entrance to the harbor. The South asked for the surrender of the fort, but the commander of the fort refused. President Buchanan refused, and when Lincoln comes to power, he refuses too. The South is in a situation here where they cannot allow the North to maintain control of the South because that appears to make them look weak, but they also don't want to be in a position where they are the first ones to attack, so they have a decision to make. Lincoln knows this as well. He's very intelligent, and he decides he's not going to send troops down to the fort to help them, but he is going to send a resupply ship. That way they will have food, supplies, in order to keep going for as long as they might possibly need. So the South has a decision to make. Do they let the fort get resupplied and thus appear weak, or do they attack the fort and risk being the ones to be viewed as the aggressor? Ultimately, they do decide that it's better to be aggressive than to be weak, and they decide to attack Fort Sumter. Over the next 2 days, Southern batteries along the harbor in Charleston bombard Fort Sumter until it eventually surrenders. These are going to be the first shots fired of the Civil War. It is not considered a battle, but it is the first shots. These are the first shots of the Civil War. This would spark, to some extent, jubilation in the South because they were excited about the fact that the war had started. They felt like they would win fairly easily. It is viewed differently in the North, many of whom in the North might have been content to see the South go in peace if that's what they wanted. Lincoln was not one of those. He was all about preserving the Union. That's going to be his major focus of the war initially. But with the South attacking first, that would change some people's minds who were now more willing to use force to keep the Union together. Finally, with the war having started, President Lincoln, after Fort Sumter, calls for 75,000 troops from throughout the country to go put down the rebellion that has now started in the South. Now, many Northerners did volunteer and filled this requirement. However, it caused a lot of anger in the Upper South. So those southern states such as North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, they had not seceded yet. But when Lincoln asks them to send troops to go and fight against their fellow southern states, it causes anger in these states. And so these 4 states, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina, they secede also because they refuse to fight against the South. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages on each side. For the North, they had industrial, manufacturing, transportation systems that were all superior to the South. They also had a population that was 3 times larger. The South, they would be able to fight a defensive war and just try to hold off the North. Most of the war was fought in the South, which would be an advantage, and they had excellent leadership. The generals that the South had were some of the best military minds that were available in the country, and that was an advantage of the South. So make sure you know those. That's it for today, and email me if you have questions, or feel free to post comments or questions. That's it.